I wasn't supposed to see inside his bag. If my boss had zipped it fully, I'd probably still be the idiot defending him at every meeting, telling everyone he was rough around the edges, but fair. Instead, I was standing in his office at 8:47 p.m., staring at a stack of contracts with my name on them and a signature I knew damn well I hadn't put there. The company logo, fake client addresses, six-figure numbers, all laid out like a confession someone forgot to burn. I remember touching the corner of the top sheet, feeling the ink ridge where a pen had dragged across the page. Someone had tried to imitate my handwriting, but they didn't understand how I loop my R, or how my signature always tilts slightly right. It felt like looking at a version of myself I'd never met and never wanted to. 5 minutes later, he walked in, saw exactly what I was holding, and smiled. "You can look all you want," he said. "You'll never prove it." Then he picked up his keys as casually as if he were taking out the trash and walked out again. He didn't raise his voice, didn't panic. He didn't even reach for the contracts. And that calm, his absolute certainty, landed heavier than the papers in my hands. I stood there breathing through my teeth, knowing nothing would ever go back to normal. People always imagine moments like that as jolts of adrenaline, but for me, it was slow, thick, like someone had poured cold cement into my chest. I sat in his chair and reread every page. My name appeared 17 times across the stack. The signatures varied slightly, like whoever forged them wasn't consistent or wasn't used to doing this under pressure. Several contracts listed companies I didn't recognize. The dates were spread out, some from last month, some from a year ago, all tied to consulting fees and operational adjustments, vague enough to pass a casual audit, but obvious enough for anyone who actually handled these accounts, which I didn't. Not once. I knew if someone higher up stumbled on this, they wouldn't even need to look at him. They'd see the signatures, the email trails he'd probably fabricated, and everything would lead to me. And in our company, being under investigation was just a slower word for gone. The room felt too quiet. Even the hum of the fluorescent light sounded wrong. I kept expecting him to walk back in and grab the papers from me, but he didn't. He knew I'd put them back. He knew fear worked better than force. When I finally stood, the window's reflection made me jump. My face looked older, somehow. I had always believed in playing by the rules, showing up, doing more than expected. I thought loyalty protected you. But staring at that stack, I realized loyalty only protects the person you hand it to. And I'd handed mine to a man who kept a bag of fake contracts, like someone keeps snacks. I slipped the papers exactly where I'd found them, not because I wanted to help him, but because touching them any longer made me feel dirty. I wiped my fingerprints from the folder out of pure instinct. My hands shook when I zipped the bag. The metal teeth clicked together like a quiet accusation. The office was dim except for the small desk lamp he always kept on. It lit the room in a warm gold glow that used to feel comforting. That night, it felt staged, like a set for a scene I didn't agree to play in. On my way out, I caught my reflection again in the glass door. Same shirt, same tired eyes, but something had shifted. The kind of shift you feel right before a storm breaks. I walked down the hallway, hearing the echo of my own steps, and every echo sounded like a countdown. At the lobby, I paused and checked the messages on my phone. Nothing from him. Nothing from anyone. The whole world moved on like nothing had happened. But nothing was the same. Not after hearing his voice, calm, confident, final. "You'll never prove it." The words stayed with me the whole drive home, bouncing around my skull in the dark. He had planned for this. That was the part I couldn't shake. He didn't fear I'd expose him because he had already built the trap. He'd been building it for months, maybe years, and I had been walking right into it, thinking I was part of a team. At home, I sat at the kitchen table without turning on the light. The faint buzz of the refrigerator was the only sound. I stared at my hands, the same hands someone had tried to imitate on those contracts, and I realized how fast a career can be rewritten without your permission. I thought about the people who trusted me in the office, the clients who knew my voice, the projects I had spent nights polishing. None of that mattered if someone decided I was the perfect fall guy. My phone buzzed once, a calendar notification for the next day's meeting. I almost laughed. Nothing about tomorrow would be normal. I felt the weight of what I had seen settle into something colder, heavier, more precise. Someone had tried to steal my name. And maybe he thought I'd stay quiet, scared, trapped exactly where he wanted me. But he didn't know me as well as he thought he did. The next morning felt wrong from the moment I stepped into the building. People were talking, but their eyes slid away from me faster than usual, like I'd suddenly become something they didn't want to stand too close to. Maybe they sensed something in my face. Maybe guilt has a smell, even when it isn't yours. My boss entered 20 minutes after me, whistling, coffee in hand, nodding at the receptionist like he hadn't planted a ticking bomb in his own desk drawer. When our eyes met, he didn't look threatened. He looked entertained. He stopped by my workstation, leaning on the wall as if making small talk. "Got a big day ahead," he said. "Lots of documents need finalizing. Might need your signature on a few." He said it lightly, like it was some inside joke, and my stomach dropped because now I knew he wasn't bluffing. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment scheme. He'd rehearsed it. He had the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. Before I could respond, he placed a folder on my desk. "Look these over, and be smart about it." He didn't wait for my answer. He walked away humming, leaving me staring at a new stack of papers. Not as obviously forged as the ones in his bag, but still laced with inconsistencies. They were designed to look legitimate enough for me to accidentally approve. Small sums, minor adjustments, nothing explosive on their own. But when stacked with everything else, they'd be enough to bury me. My pulse hammered in my ears as I flipped through the pages. I could already see the trap closing. He'd claim I'd been signing things like this for months. Whether I had or hadn't wouldn't matter. Paper trails don't care about truth. They care about signatures. I kept my voice steady when I walked into his office. "These numbers don't match our records." It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. He didn't look up from his computer. "Funny," he said. "They match mine." Something acidic burned at the back of my throat. "I'm not signing them." That made him pause. Slowly he leaned back in his chair and studied me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Something between irritation and curiosity, as if I were a dog that suddenly bit the hand that fed it. "You don't want to be difficult," he said softly. "You're already involved more than you think." He tapped his keyboard once, bringing up an email thread. My name was in it. My supposed approval. Dates, timestamps. Completely fabricated, but neat and believable. He let me read the first lines before closing the screen. People sign things all the time without remembering. Mistakes happen. Miscommunications. But patterns? He shrugged. Patterns are harder to explain. I felt the floor tilt, like gravity suddenly shifted. He had prepared an entire architecture of lies, with foundation, framing, backup supports, and I was the central beam. But that was just the beginning. Over the next week, he started sending me tasks that were increasingly suggestive. Clean up this report. Draft this adjustment. Approve this retroactive change. Each request was written in a tone that implied prior agreement. If I refused, he could claim I'd been cooperative before. If I complied, he could say I was knowingly participating. Every email felt like a noose tightening around my inbox. And the worst part, he CC'd people. Subtle, but enough to make sure others saw my name next to his requests. If any investigation started later, it would look like we worked closely, quietly, consistently. The narrative was already being written. One afternoon, he leaned into my cubicle, pretending to straighten his tie. "You look tired," he said. "Stress will do that. You should get ahead of things before they get ahead of you." His voice was low, patient, almost fatherly. No one likes surprises. I wanted to tell him to go to hell. Instead, I swallowed the words, because rage wasn't useful, not yet. That night, Sitting in the empty office long after everyone left, I opened every shared file we'd touched in the past year. Some had been edited when I wasn't on the clock. Some had comments I didn't write. A few had metadata linking back to his login, not mine. He wasn't even careful, just confident nobody would look. And then, silence. The kind that means something's gone wrong. I clicked a spreadsheet I hadn't seen before. My name was listed as the account lead for a client we hadn't worked with in months. Adjustments had been processed under my ID. Transfers noted. The numbers were small enough to avoid attention, but regular enough to form a pattern. The pattern he mentioned, the one he could weaponize. My breath hitched. This wasn't him setting up a trap. This was him perfecting it. For the first time, something in me cracked. Not fear, not panic, but a thin thread of patience snapping in the quiet. I closed the file and stared at my reflection in the dark monitor. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like someone who had finally stopped pretending everything would resolve if he just kept his head down. I realized I'd been saving a man who never wanted saving. I'd been loyal to someone who saw loyalty as leverage. He thought he owned the narrative. He thought he owned me, but he didn't. When I shut down the computer, I felt a steadiness I hadn't felt in days. Not relief, not victory, just clarity. A clean, cold line between what he expected me to do and what I was actually going to do. Tomorrow, I wouldn't walk into the office the same way, and I sure as hell wouldn't walk in unprepared. I came in early the next morning, earlier than anyone except the cleaning crew. The building felt different at dawn, like a stage before actors arrive. Quiet, neutral, unclaimed. I needed that quiet. I needed a few hours where his shadow wasn't over my shoulder. I sat down, plugged in a flash drive, and began collecting everything. Screenshots, file versions, metadata timestamps, email headers. Not the contents, those could be twisted or contextualized, but the technical footprints he'd forgotten to erase. For someone so confident, he wasn't nearly careful enough. Halfway through copying a set of spreadsheets, I noticed something, an internal note attached to a contract draft I'd never seen. Finalize with R needs signature by Eom. His initials, my forged signature. Date stamped 3 weeks ago, long before I discovered the files in his bag. It hit me then. He had been writing me into this story for months, maybe longer. I wasn't an afterthought. I was the foundation. But something else hit me too. If he'd grown that confident, he'd slipped somewhere. I just had to find the loose thread. I opened an archived mailbox folder he probably didn't remember existed. He'd forwarded himself documents years ago from an old address he rarely used. The folder contained everything from half-formal notes to personal reminders. That's when I found it. An email sent to himself, containing a draft contract almost identical to one of the forged ones. Except the date was different, the amounts were different, and the signature block was blank. He'd used the same template multiple times, but forgot to delete the early version. If anyone compared them side by side, the forgery would be obvious. I didn't know it yet, but that decision, to open that forgotten folder, would cost him everything. By the time people started filing into the office, I had already copied the evidence onto 2 drives and emailed a password-protected archive to a private account he didn't know existed. When he walked in at 9:17, coffee in hand, he didn't greet me. He didn't need to. The smirk on his face already said everything. He thought I was cornered. He called me into his office before he even took off his coat. "We need to talk about yesterday," he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes flicked toward the folder on his desk, the same folder with those half-finished traps. He folded his hands. "I'm concerned you're falling behind. And when people fall behind, they make mistakes. Mistakes that affect the whole team." It was a warning, a stage-setting monologue before the execution. I kept my voice level. "Which mistakes are you referring to?" He gestured loosely. "Patterns mostly, inconsistencies, documents missing signatures, documents appearing to be signed without proper authorization." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air like humidity. "We'll need to involve HR soon, just to clear things up." "H&R. Of course. He wanted witnesses, a paper trail, a documented conversation he could twist later. The expression on his face was almost gentle, like he was doing me a favor. I said nothing. Silence unsettled him, not because he feared me, but because he expected obedience, expected fear. When he didn't get it, he leaned forward. "You're smart," he said. "Smarter than people give you credit for. That's why I've trusted you with so much. But if you refuse to cooperate now, there's only so much I can do to protect you." Protect me? As if he weren't the one lighting the match under the floor. I looked at the window behind him, the reflection of his tailored shirt, his perfect posture, his certainty, and then I looked at the small framed certificate on the wall, some leadership course he'd taken years ago. The glass was cracked in the corner, a flaw, a detail he forgot to fix. It made something in me settle, like a weight locking into place. "I'm not signing anything retroactive," I said quietly, "and I won't take responsibility for documents I didn't approve." For a moment, his expression twitched, not anger, calculation. He wasn't used to resistance. He stood, walked around his desk, and closed the door gently, not to intimidate me, but to control the narrative. "If that's the position you want to take," he said, "then we should prepare for the consequences." He dismissed me with a nod. A king releasing a servant. Back at my desk, my hands were steady in a way they hadn't been all week. I opened my browser and typed an email to one of our former clients, the one whose contract bore my forged signature. I kept the message simple. "Can you confirm whether you signed the attached document?" I attached the contract. A minute later, I hit send. They responded in less than an hour. "We have never seen this agreement." My chest tightened, not with fear, but with momentum. For the first time, I wasn't just avoiding the trap. I was stepping outside it entirely. That afternoon, he summoned me to a meeting with HR. He entered the room relaxed, sleeves rolled, smile polished. He had printed documents, references to irregularities, unapproved adjustments, concerning behavioral changes. He slid the pages toward HR like presenting evidence in court. He talked about leadership burdens, the importance of accountability, how he wanted to help me correct course before things escalated. HR looked uncomfortable. I looked at him. He looked at the room like it already belonged to him. Then I asked a single question that made his jaw tense. "Can you explain why these files show edits under your login? At times I wasn't in the building?" His eyes snapped to the documents. HR leaned closer, frowning. He opened his mouth, searching for a lie that wouldn't sound absurd. Before he found one, I laid out the timestamps. Calm, precise, irrefutable. He tried course-correcting, saying there must be a mix-up, maybe IT issues, maybe account syncing. But HR wasn't nodding anymore. They were watching him, not me. That night, as I organized the rest of the evidence, I felt something shift. Not relief, not triumph, but a clean snap inside me. A break from the person who tried to play along, to keep peace, to believe loyalty mattered. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. I closed my laptop, knowing tomorrow I would finish what I started. And for the first time, the fear wasn't mine anymore. The next day didn't explode the way I thought it would. No shouting, no dramatic confrontations in the hallway. Just small shifts. HR called me in first, not him. That was the tell. They'd brought in someone from compliance. Someone I'd never seen before, suit a little too sharp for our building, badge clipped to his belt. He introduced himself, shook my hand like this was just another meeting, then started asking very specific questions. Not about my feelings, not about team dynamics, about files, about dates, about login histories. Someone had done their homework overnight. I laid everything out, not like a victim begging to be believed, but like a professional walking through a report. Copies of the contracts, the old template he'd reused, the email from the client confirming they'd never seen the agreement with my forged signature, the timestamp showing edits under his login at 2 a.m. on days I wasn't even in the country. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. The facts were ugly enough on their own. Halfway through, the compliance guys stopped taking notes and just listened. HR kept glancing between us, their earlier doubt replaced by something else, unease maybe, or the realization that this wasn't a personality conflict they could smooth over with a performance plan. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then compliance said, "We'll need to speak with him next. You're not to discuss this with anyone until we're done. Understood?" I nodded. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. More like adrenaline, finally having somewhere to go. Back at my desk, the office felt off. People sensed something circling overhead. He stayed in his office with the door closed, blinds half shut, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't look at me once. Around noon, he was called into the same conference room I'd just left. He didn't come out for almost 2 hours. When he finally did, his face looked different. The composure was still there, the expensive shirt still crisp, but the assurance was gone. His jaw was tight. He walked past my desk without stopping, but his eyes flicked to me for a fraction of a second, not with superiority, not with amusement, with hate. He disappeared into his office, closed the door, and 10 minutes later, security showed up. They weren't dramatic about it. No handcuffs, no public scene. Just two quiet guys from downstairs and someone from HR. They went into his office. A few minutes later, he came out with them, carrying his bag. Zipped all the way this time. People pretended not to stare. Emails went unread. Keyboards went quiet. He didn't say a word to me as he walked by. For a second, our shoulders almost lined up, the way they had 1,000 times going into meetings together. Then he kept walking, straight to the elevator. The doors closed on the man who once told me I'd never prove anything. That should have felt like the end, but it wasn't. Not yet. Over the next week, compliance tore through every file he touched. IT pulled login data and remote access logs. Finance matched payments against legitimate contracts. Clients were quietly contacted. The pattern he'd been so sure I'd never expose unfolded like a blueprint. Retroactive adjustments, fake consulting fees, shell companies linked through addresses he thought no one would bother to cross-check. They found more forged signatures, too. Not just mine, others, people who hadn't noticed because the numbers seemed small, routine. A rounding error in a busy life. He tried to fight back, of course. I heard through HR that his initial defense was to blame overzealous subordinates, to paint himself as someone who'd trusted the wrong people. He said I'd gone rogue, that I'd mishandled documents, that he'd only just discovered the extent of my mistakes. He even tried to suggest I had somehow hacked his login. But every story he told unraveled under its own weight. Every accusation he made ran headfirst into the same wall. Data, timestamps, client confirmations, version histories. The very systems he'd used to quietly manipulate the numbers became the ones that pinned him down. That was the small, quiet justice in all of this. Not him being marched out, not the whispered gossip, but watching his own arrogance collapse on top of him. The confidence behind "you'll never prove it" didn't disappear in a blaze. It just eroded, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to stand on. A few days later, HR called me back in. Different tone this time, softer, more careful. "We want to be clear," they said. "You're not under investigation. Your actions, bringing this to our attention, preserving records, helped us identify serious misconduct." They offered reassurances, performance review notes adjusted, language about my integrity and cooperation added to my file. Then they slid another document across the table, an option to stay with a formal commendation, or to leave with a severance package and a very strong letter of recommendation, no negative marks, full benefits payout. They thought I'd jump at the praise, at the promotion they hinted at, a chance to help rebuild the department, but I'd seen too much of what lived under the surface here. Too many people who looked away until they were forced to see. Too much silence when it mattered. I wasn't angry at them specifically. I was just done. "I'll take the exit," I said. They blinked. "Are you sure? You're in a strong position." "Exactly," I replied. "And I'd like to leave while that's still true." That night, I walked out of the building with a small box, some personal things, a plant that had barely survived our fluorescent lights, a mug I never liked but always used, no security escort, no whispers about being fired, just a quiet, deliberate choice to step away. A month later, he was more than just gone. Internal memos leaked, as they always do. Words like fraud, breach of trust, referral to authorities. I don't know how far the investigation went outside the company, and honestly, I don't need to. That's his story now, not mine. He built his own future when he started faking signatures. I found a new job elsewhere. Smaller company, smaller ego at the top, cleaner books, at least from what I can see. In my first week there, my new manager asked me to sign something just to speed up the process. I read every line, twice. Then I asked him to explain the parts that didn't add up. He laughed and said, "You're thorough." I didn't laugh back. I just said, "Yes, I am." Sometimes, late at night, I think about that moment in his office. The open bag, the stack of contracts, the way his voice sounded when he said I'd never prove it. I don't feel fear anymore when I replay it. Just a kind of distant pity. He thought he was untouchable because he understood the rules better than everyone else. What he never understood was that rules cut both ways. The systems he used to hide himself were the same ones that made it possible to drag everything into the light. I didn't expose some massive corporate conspiracy. I didn't bring down a building. I didn't become a hero. I just refused to drown quietly so he could stay dry. In the end, that was enough. He lost his position, his reputation, the safety net he thought my name would give him. I lost a job I'd already outgrown, and a version of myself that believed loyalty was always noble. I can live with that trade. These days, when someone tells me, "Don't worry, just sign here," I remember the feel of those forged contracts in my hands, the ink that pretended to be mine, the calm smile of a man who thought he'd already written my ending. And then I take my time, read every line, and make sure the only name I'm lending is one I'm willing to stand behind. Because I proved something after all, not just about him, but about me. He was wrong. I could prove it.